Gotta be able to talk about this stuff, especially with that person who is your partner, because money is an important part of life. It's often a pressure point in relationships, and just thinking like, oh, I can try to grin and bear it or hide it, just it's never going to end well. So you've got to be able to have those conversations.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike,
And I'm Andrew.
and we're the Midlife Guys. So last week we kicked off part one of a four-part series where we talked about midlife financial well-being. As everyone knows, there's a lot of volatility in the world right now due to increasing gas prices, inflation, employment disruption due to artificial intelligence, and other issues. These factors are putting midlifers on edge. In a February 2026 survey from Gallup, 62% of Americans feel like the economy is headed in the wrong direction, and 59% believe that now is the wrong time to be looking for a job. So the sentiment is not great out there. Unfortunately, it's not great in the United States, and it's not great out in the rest of the world. Those aged 35 to 55 are feeling the most stressed about their financial situation. In a study published by Jeffrey and Vari Clark, a professor of social work at the University of North Dakota, how a person feels about their financial outlook can impact their health 20 times more than the actual financial event itself, which is pretty staggering. Study goes on to say that individuals can feel paralyzed on just the thought of losing their job, economic uncertainty, which leads to increased depression, stress, and fatigue. Today, I want to talk about how midlifers can change or can manage their stress because of this financial uncertainty. And this is a topic that hits close to home for me. As we discussed a lot in last week's episode, midlifers learned a lot from the Great Recession of 2008, including yours truly. However, the financial best practices I use today are ones that I had to learn back then because I was extremely stressed out when everything started collapsing in late 2007 because I had not saved the money that I should. And I vividly remember watching hundreds of people getting marched into conference rooms and then escorted out of the building at the company I worked for at the time. I know a lot of midlifers did also share or
Yeah.
shared that experience as well. So I want to really focus today's conversation on our collective ability to be resilient in the face of financial uncertainty. So, Andrew, are you ready to talk about this?
Yeah, we get the best timelines, midlifers. All the good stuff happens to us over the time.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm going to be very optimistic because I
I think
think
it
we
is
are
worth being
resilient.
optimistic. Yes, I think
I
that's
think we
true.
are resilient.
And before we jump in, I'll just another quick shout out to if you've not had a chance to listen to last week's episode, definitely go check that out. I think it's a good way to kind of start this deeper conversation about kind of money and midlife and financial stress. So I'm ready to jump on in.
Awesome. Let's do it. So, the first step in tackling financial stress should come as no surprise. It is communication. In a recent survey conducted by YouGov for Bankrate, 43% of respondents said that money is negatively impacting their mental health, but they don't have anyone to talk to about it. I'm going to pause right there
Yeah.
because the data that is also included in that survey seems to contradict that a little bit. There's a difference between not having somebody to talk to about it and just not talking to somebody about it. So I feel like that was worded in a weird way. Um, so I think it's important to note here. The survey also goes on to say that most Americans, with 81% of men, say they don't want to talk about their financial stress, would indicate that we have more of a not wanting to talk about things rather than a don't having the ability to talk to anybody.
Yeah. I mean, that
Um,
makes sense to me. I think a lot of people don't like to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, too many Americans, and I don't think this is limited to the United States. I'm sure it's a global phenomenon, but this is the data I've got. We're just not willing to admit when we're under financial stress, and I think
Hmm.
that's a huge problem. And this is why that study is so important because communication is so important. Helpguide.org International actually put together some really good insights about this specific topic. They compare financial stress to being akin to depression. However, people don't talk about it because they're embarrassed. But midlifers really have to open up about these financial pressures because you'll find that there actually is a network that is there to support you. So here's some of the tips. The person that you're talking to about your financial pressures doesn't have to be able to fix your problems or even offer any financial help. They're just there to be a listening board. To ease your burden, they just need to be willing to talk things out without judging or criticizing you. We all have those people in our life, whether they're friends or whatever. You need to be honest about what you're going through and the emotions that you're experiencing. Talking over those worries can help make sense of what you're facing, and your friend or your loved one may even be able to come up with solutions that you hadn't thought of. That's not guaranteed. I wouldn't look for that, but they might. So, yet again, these tips to just talking about it can go a really long way because financial stress can be debilitating if you don't talk about it. And the fact of the matter is, your friends, your family members, your partner, your wife, your husband, is not going to understand if you are feeling depressed or you're feeling withdrawn unless you're talking to them about what the issue might be. So that's why communication is so important here. But I'm curious to hear from our listeners. Have you spoken with a family member or a friend about financial pressures? Do you want to but haven't? Andrew, have
I mean,
you?
I think that I have actually, which is it's a good thing. I mean, I think one fortunate thing is being married is you have someone to kind of talk through and have there to support you, which is important. But I think it's also good to talk to people outside of who your spouse, is. I do think that going back to an earlier point I wanted to kind of start with was the idea of people maybe having good friends or family members, but just not wanting to talk about it. I think money is still very taboo, certainly in the United States, maybe in other places as well. I know for a lot of us, you're kind of raised, you're not supposed to talk about money, right? Like that was one of the things, like you don't really, talk about or share a ton. And think too, there's a difference between, you know, being an asshole and like flaunting your money or thinking like that influencer style culture where like, look how wonderful I am versus having like real honest conversations with people about things that you might be struggling with, including if that comes to like, finances. I think we've all at some point in our lives had financial stress for sure, probably struggled with money. And I think there's also this sense, especially if you're kind of a professional or someone who's career oriented, um, that if you are having financial pressure, like that's a weakness somehow, or you failed in some way, shape, or form, which is not, it's not true. Again, it's just a reality that all of us will go through times where we've got more financial pressure or something unexpected will happen and we'll have some issues. And I do think it's really important to be able to talk to other people about that. I feel like in my experience, just being able to talk about it sometimes helps alleviate that pressure because you're not holding all of that in yourself, but you can kind of help share that burden just by talking about it. To your point, Mike, even if somebody can't solve your problem, just talking through it can be really, really helpful. It kind of reminds me of some advice from um, Scott Galloway, who some people might have heard of. He's an NYU professor and a podcaster. He's got a bunch of different stuff, but he talks about um, professionals, men specifically, but I think it is appropriate for everybody, having kind of like a kitchen cabinet, he calls it, of people that they can talk to about big things in their lives. Maybe it's like professional changes or life changes, but I think financial issues falls into that as well. Like, are there a small group of people who you can feel comfortable talking to honestly to get different perspectives and insights and just to have someone to be that kind of that sounding board? Because yeah, bottling it all up is not healthy or helpful. um, and as I said, we all have these stresses and issues, so we might as well talk about it with one another, at least try to do so in a really honest way.
Yes. I mean, this is so important because everyone needs to realize everyone listening to this and everyone in the world needs to realize they are not alone. You are
Yep.
not alone. You have friends. You have somebody in this world who is interested about your well-being. Um, and yes, I think you bring up a good point. I think this is a universal problem in that you never talk about money, religion, or politics
Right.
because they're just too taboo. No, don't follow that advice. That's just dumb as shit. The fact of the matter is you do have to talk about these things. You have to talk about them with your loved ones. You have to talk about them with your friends. If so, especially if one of those subjects, money, since we're talking about money, is stressing you out, because you're not alone. They want to the people in your life who care about you want to see you succeed. And hopefully you feel the same way about them. This is definitely a lesson I had to learn in 2008 during the Great Recession. I felt very trapped. I felt very alone at the time. I was fortunate in that I had a job so I could pay all my bills. But you, back then you didn't know if there was that so many things happened so quickly that just melted the entire market down and so many businesses were closing. You didn't know if there was going to be another shoe to drop. So there was a lot of uncertainty um, during that time. And so, you know, I, I guess when I look back, I felt more trapped than I should have, but you don't know what the future is going to bring. And when I finally opened up to some friends and started talking to them about that, I realized that many of them had the exact same uncertainty. They
Right.
felt the same
Yeah.
way. They were feeling frustrated. They were feeling depressed. Um, and there was a collective sigh or relief, knowing that we were all in the same boat together. And I think that's really meaningful. When you know you're not alone, um, it does ease the pressure, or at least eases the depression about the situation, I think. Um, you know, so I think that's important. The communication is just so important. Um, we didn't necessarily have any answers for one another on what to do, but we could, you know, at least be there for each other and talking about these things. And sometimes that's all it takes.
I think that's true. I think one other thing that might be slightly, especially learn those lessons, but slightly different now is obviously a lot of midlifers are at a different stage of life. Like, I'm married now. People might be married or have long term partners or be in long term relationships. Like, you've got to be able to talk about this stuff, especially with that person who is your partner, because money is an important part of life. It's often a pressure point in relationships, and just thinking like, oh, I can try to grin and bear it or hide it. Just it's never going to end well. So you've got to be able to have those conversations.
Big driver of divorce, money,
It is, yeah.
not having honest conversations
Yeah.
about money. All right. The second recommendation is what some have called comprehensive lifestyle budgeting. It's a mouthful, I know.
I love a good budget, let me tell you.
Yes, you do.
I
This
do.
is where you take a holistic examination of all your expenses and your lifestyle and make adjustments accordingly. For example, a typical monthly gym membership costs about $40 to $60 a month in the US. Is that a cost center that you need to continue? Um, I don't have an answer. What does your lifestyle dictate? You know, could you buy some weights at home that would save you money in the long run? Could you take advantage of your city or county's free recreational spaces rather than spending it on the gym? Or is the gym, not only a release for you from an exercise standpoint, but also a social standpoint? The idea here is you just look at things holistically. Um, Another example is just growing fruits or vegetables at home. Is there a particular fruit or vegetable that you eat a lot of? Is it more cost effective to grow it at home rather than going to the store every week to go buy it? Maybe. You've got to sit there and figure out the numbers here. The approach is all centered around your individual lifestyle, and so it's unique to you. But eliminating cost centers, however small they are, can add up to huge monthly savings in the long run. Additional comprehensive lifestyle budgeting tips from Bankrate include using cash back or coupon apps for frequent and essential purchases, switching your mobile phone provider. There's a lot of competition in the mobile phone space. Everybody should be looking at that as an option. Shrinking your utility bills through automation or LED bulbs, exploring different banking options. We discussed that last week.
Mm-hmm.
Removing unnecessary subscriptions or apps or streaming services. There's too many of them now. Just pare it down, pare it down. And prioritizing more free recreational activities and events. Individuals who really focus on these lifestyle budgeting changes can save on average between $300 and $600 a month.
A
That's a
month?
huge amount a
Yeah, that's a
month.
lot of money. Whew.
Huge savings that can ease that financial stress when you see those funds that are still in your bank account at the end of the month. And where should they be going? Into that rainy day fund that we talked about last week. Andrew, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got a couple of thoughts on this, but first I'm kind of curious. You mentioned, which to be honest, I hadn't given a ton of thought to, the idea of like couponing or cash back like apps and programs. I'd love any tips people have, or if there are ones that they really like to use. Because I think that's kind of an interesting idea or approach that I've not really explored before, but might be worth taking a look at. Um, I will say though, I love the idea of the broader sort of like not just budgeting, but looking at your lifestyle and trying to figure out like what are you really using or not using. And so that's reminded me, I've got to do this again. I did this maybe like a year and a half ago with all the streaming services. Like we just kind of, because they're monthly subscriptions that come out of the credit card. So I see it once a month, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess we're still using that. Or every now and then we'll watch something from some random, streaming service. But when I was looking at this about whatever, a year and a half or so ago, and I added up like our monthly internet fees, plus, we had cable at the time, plus all of the ridiculous number of streaming services we had, like we got that up monthly. And then over the course of a year, it was like $3,000 to $4,000 in this stuff,
Good
which is
God.
like blew my mind. I know, I'm like, what are we paying for? And so we sat down and had like a conversation. My wife and I did and went through each one and like, okay, what are we actually watching? What are we really using? And we went down and pared it down by more. We cut it down by more than 60 or 70% at this point. Which is a lot more money that we're keeping every month. But just going through that habit of really taking some time and asking ourselves, like, how often are we actually watching this specific thing, and how much do we really need it? Was important. I mean, to the extent that I even went out and spent $40 to get a digital antenna that plugs into our TV, so we get over the air signal for some channels. Feel like we're back in the 90s. It's great. My kids now know that they can't fast forward through all the ads. We do that mostly for sports. That's on like, ABC and CBS and all those things. But it's true. It's like we were paying all this money for like live TV and cable that we were not watching at all. So like, why are we doing that? Or, streaming services that we've not used a lot, we had to say goodbye to. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I really wish we have HBO Max Plus, whatever the hell it's called right now, or some of the other ones. But do I really need it? I don't. Like we don't have enough time to watch the things that we have on our or that we're streaming already. So I do think that idea though of like looking at your lifestyle and really evaluating where you're spending money and not spending money can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't never heard of this like comprehensive lifestyle budgeting of like branding that they put behind it, but I am intrigued by it. I mean, I try to do this, but I do like the lifestyle focused approach that's being taken
Yeah.
with this, because I'm always examining my cost centers and figuring out where I can save money. The first I'm looking at right now is my internet provider, because internet is just so fucking expensive, and there's really no reason for it to be so expensive. So I'm very intrigued by possibly switching to Starlink, which is half the cost.
Do they do residential internet, or like individuals can get that? Oh, I didn't know
and
that.
They have this package right now that's still half the cost of what I'm paying. They come and set it up at your house for free, and you also get a miniature like mobile one, so you can take it with you when you're traveling.
And it's covered by the same, like it's the same. It's all covered in the same plan.
Yeah, all covered by the same plan.
It's worth looking at maybe.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, you know, half the cost. It's quite a bit of savings.
That is a lot of
Um,
savings. Yeah.
I'm a member of a recreational club that I use primarily for the gym, but I'm wondering, is that necessary when I've got all these free resources right by, at my fingertips? That would be a significant amount of savings. As you know, like the only entertainment focused thing I have is Apple One Plus. But that includes the news, the music, the fitness,
It's a lot.
everything
Yeah.
like that. So there's a lot of value in that. Um, I had not given much thought to the cash back apps, like kind of like you, like the Rakuten or the Capital One Shopping. Um, but I'm very intrigued, and I'm going to start
Mm.
doing a little bit more research about that. This Ibotta app, which provides cash back from grocery stores like Kroger and Publix, and even some of the discount stores. Really have downloaded that, looking through that, because that it's not a huge amount of money, but it's around $260 a year. It's not
Mm.
nothing. That's
No.
something, you know.
Plus, like
$260 can go.
psychologically, I feel better too, right? Because like I'm making something back. I'm like getting
Exactly.
more. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I feel like, as I said before, financial stress can be debilitating, and these little moves can make you feel just much more in control.
Yep.
And I think that's what we really talked about a lot in our previous episodes. It's all about control. If we feel like we've got more control, the better we'll feel. So I think this is one way to ease that financial stress and to take control. The final recommendation: embracing the unknown. Ooh, well, I
Da,
think
da,
this is just
da.
I know this is a good life lesson for just anything. So we're all familiar with fight or flight instincts, but those urges can be a real challenge for us because they let our emotions dictate our next steps rather than logic. The same is true with financial stress. We have to model out scenarios for ourselves before they ever happen. I know this is really challenging. So, for example, if I lose my job, how will I pay my bills? How will I pay my mortgage or my rent? What makes me a desirable candidate to find a new job? Um, there are just so many unknowns when facing financial stress, but it's important to take a step back and self regulate. That includes taking time to eat healthy and exercise. It also means that you should be refreshing your resume, networking with the industries in which you do work or want to work, learning new things, focusing on your professional development, but also finding the time for your friends and family during that, because they're going to be a helpful uh, source of support for you during the time too. Um, but you got to use this time even before something happens to gather the information on focus really what on you want to do, ways in which you want to reduce your financial stress. Because just being prepared, embracing that unknown is going to set you up for success. If something were to happen in the future, you'll feel a lot more positive when it does. If you can feel positive, you'll feel
Just
better
more
grounded, at
prepared.
least more
Yeah.
prepared.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this advice, Andrew?
Yes to all this advice. I sort of chuckling a little bit too because I was wondering if you talked to my wife about this because she often jokes that I love to think through scenarios. Always doing. I'm like, Jess, we got to talk and think through some scenarios, figure out what possibly might happen. And like, here's a very real world example too. Is early last year, you know, there are a couple of scenarios in which like professionally could have had some negative impacts, like financially we're under some stress. And we sat down and mapped out like 6 different scenarios from worst case to best case and kind of like what do we do in each of those? Like what do we cut back on? What type of decisions do we need to make financially if certain things happen? Um, Luckily the worst case scenarios haven't happened, which is great, but we felt more prepared. And when it was a time that, my wife and I were both kind of, stressed out by what was happening around us and worried about, both of our like jobs and just like where money could be coming in or not coming in from. And so it was really helpful to sit down and think through, okay, we have a plan. So if any of these things happen, like we already know what we're going to do. And so it's not like if the worst does happen and then we're kind of running around or we feel debilitated, we had done that planning in advance. So I'm all about scenario planning. I think it can be an incredibly valuable and useful tool. And again, it goes back to something you had mentioned earlier, Mike, that we talked a lot about last week, which is the sense of control, or what I'd call like just feeling like you have a sense of agency. Like I can make decisions for myself, or I've at least set myself up with a plan of action to do if something happens. So I know I'm prepared and I feel better about it. And I'm not going to let my emotions take over or let whatever situation around us happening take over. And I do think that can be really valuable. I'm curious, I'd love to hear from our listeners how many other people do this. I don't know how many do. At least I know when I talk to other midlife friends and I talk about like scenario planning, sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy. But I think it's useful and it's helpful. And so I would definitely encourage others to think about, what could happen, even if it seems kind of crazy, what could happen, and like what can you do to help set yourself up so that you can kind of weather whatever that's going to be. And the plus side of that too is, based on that conversation that we had last year, we identified some other stuff that we're like, we probably really don't need to be spending money on certain things. And so we cut back on a few things. Again, none of the worst case scenarios happen. So I feel like we're also a little bit better off than we would have been otherwise, because we're not spending as much money on some random stuff that we probably didn't need in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, sound advice. Glad you're feeling much more positive. I know this is kind of a tough one for me, because Andrew and Freeman both kind of like to point out that I can do some of the things that I do because I don't have kids. So I'm more interested in hearing from our parents who are listeners. If taking this advice, especially like the professional development and networking before something happens, is possible. Just because I know being a parent takes up a lot of time. I mean, and preparing this level of preparation does take a lot of time. Planning out all these scenarios does take a lot of time. So, because you're talking about being on for essentially like 14 hours a day, all the time.
As a parent, it's like it never. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things you can't do, right? Or it's harder to do certain things, especially some of the, like now it's hard to do some like evening professional development or networking stuff. I think that's true. I'll say almost on the flip side, and I'd be curious what of our listeners, especially their parents, might have to say about this, but I almost feel more kind of motivated to do some of this stuff or some of the scenario planning or additional work, because I want to make sure I'm like thinking about my family or trying to do whatever I can to kind of like protect them long term. So I don't know, having the kids almost sort of like motivates me to want to try to think through this stuff further, to kind of have plans in place or to be as prepared as possible for something that might happen. But I'd be curious if others feel that way or not. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess it's also important to just note that planning is important, but don't like make it so you like put yourself in a hole, like make yourself depressed from planning.
No, that's true. There's a balance to it for sure. Like I think maybe it's about just trying to like give yourself, and sometimes it's just a set amount of time where you like be like, all right, for the next hour, I'm going to think about, what are some things, different scenarios that could happen and what might we want to do if that happens. But yeah, I think you're right. You can, if you're not careful, like start to spiral pretty quickly, or just always think like the worst things are going to happen. And I don't think it's about that. It's more just thinking through something in advance. So you're making more rational decisions, hopefully, than you might be in the moment.
Yes.
But I think that's a good point of not to get too sucked into it, because that would also be problematic. That would not be good.
Because Andrew's a worrywart.
Like to be prepared.
Very worried. All right. So, yet again, we've already blown through another 30 minutes, Andrew. If you've not done so already, please like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it helps us a lot. Remember that you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMedia, and all your favorite podcasting platforms. And until next week, good luck, guys.
See ya.